Hey folks, this is Rhykker, bringing you an update to a Diablo 3 patch 2.3 wizard build that I posted a few weeks ago. This version of this build is what's being used to top the solo wizard Greater Rift non-season leaderboards in the current patch. In seasons, we're seeing more Veer's Archon wizards, but the Archon playstyle is not one that everyone is necessarily fond of. We'll go over the skills, the gear, and the playstyle that you'll need to rock this build. Now, I'm going to assume that you've already seen the old video and state that the main distinction between that and the updated version of this build is that for a weapon, we're now using an Ether Walker. As a legendary property, Teleport no longer has a cooldown, but instead costs 25 arcane power. This affords us a tremendous amount of mobility and will easily allow us to quickly accumulate stacks on our Taeguk legendary gem. Now, one note I'll make here is that in the footage you're seeing, I'm actually not using Taeguk. Right now, in non-season, Taeguk is an incredibly powerful legendary gem because it grants both offensive and defensive bonuses. Every time you spend resource, you gain a stack on your Taeguk. But if you go 3 seconds without spending primary resource, you'll lose all your stacks. So given this is a best-in-slot gem for a number of builds across a number of classes, a big part of the Diablo 3 meta right now is playing the Taeguk minigame. On some classes, this is easier to do than others, and on the wizard, it's a little tougher. You have to remember, at least once every 3 seconds, to cast either Teleport or the other spender that this build will use, which is Meteor. But really, it will be Teleport spam that will allow us to maintain all those stacks. Meteor costs a lot more arcane power, and you're going to be running very dry. The Taeguk game is one that you have to practice a lot in order to maintain those stacks, because once you lose your stacks, it takes a while to build them up again, and that will really hurt your grift timing. Personally, I don't enjoy playing the Taeguk minigame on wizards, so I just swapped out to a pain enhancer for purposes of recording this video. But if you really want to optimize, then you're going to have to learn and practice the Taeguk minigame. Another distinction between what you're seeing in the playstyle versus what I'm going to recommend to you are the bracers. The bracers I'll recommend are Ancient Parthan Defenders, or rather Ancient Parthan Defenders, because that's going to give you a nice amount of added survivability. Instead, what I have are Strong Arm Bracers because I couldn't find decent Ancient Parthans, and instead of giving me that added survivability, those give me a bit more damage. But for pushing the highest Greater Rifts, the survivability is really what you'll need. And this is particularly when you're going to be teleporting in to activate your Arcane Meteor. The huge advantage of using the Ether Walker is that you're able to immediately teleport back out of the fray. In the previous version of this build, we were recommending a lot more defensive legendary gems, but thanks to the added mobility of the Ether Walker, we can go on the offensive a little bit more. So overall, the build revolves around getting the full 6-piece Delrasha set bonus, combined with 4 pieces of Del's Ears. Of course, this will boil down to actually 3 and 5 pieces, plus a Ring of Royal Grandeur in your cube, but those are the set bonuses you're going for. This combination of Delrasha and Del's Ears is commonly known as a Delrasha build, and there are a number of variants that have existed over time. Along with that, you're going to want a Crown of the Primus helm and the Nilfer's Boast boots, and the ideal setup is to have the boots in the cube while you equip the helm. And the reason for this is that the legendary property on the helm doesn't roll on a range. It's a flat effect. Slow time gains the effect of every rune. Whereas on the boots, the amount of damage increase does roll on a range. And when you extract something into the cube, you get the max possible roll. And lastly, you're going to want Focus and Restraint to round out the set. Also in the cube, we'll want a Furnace, and that's just for that added damage to take down those elites. So a big important part of the Delrasha wizard is finding a skill rotation. This build revolves around calling down meteors of each of the 4 elements: Arcane, Cold, Fire, and Lightning, not necessarily in that order. Again, this is a playstyle that you'll need to practice. Once you factor in Focus and Restraint as well, those will further play into your skill rotation, and really you want to be looking to maximize your damage here. In play, you'll need to think of your skill rotation and practice it, because when you're in the thick of combat, it's easy to lose your cool and then just start spamming skills. So this is a much more calculated and methodical style of play than other classes or builds. If we take a look at our skills, we have Magic Missile, Glacial Spike to proc our Cold Meteor, Meteor Shower to proc our Fire Meteor, Teleport Calamity to proc our Arcane Meteor, and lastly, Slow Time will be proccing our final Meteor. And thanks to the Crown of the Primus, we're actually gaining every rune on Slow Time, so it doesn't really matter what rune you select. However, the damage type it will deal will correspond to your highest elemental damage on your gear. That's why on your bracers, on your Ancient Parthens, you're gonna want lightning damage. That will round out your meteors. Magic Weapon Conduit will give us a bit more damage and help restore arcane power. That's another distinction between this version and the previous version of the build, that this one is a lot more mana thirsty. As for Energy Armor Force Weapon, that serves as both a flat toughness boost and, more critically, will help you avoid being one-shotted. For our passives, Blur gives us some toughness, Unstable Anomaly gives us that extra life, Astral Presence helps us with resource management, and Elemental Exposure is critical to maximizing our damage. Now again, this build is all about the skill rotation, and so here's a sample one that may work for you. Start by casting Slow Time to crowd control your enemies. This will proc your Lightning Meteor, keep your enemies in roughly the same place, and increase your damage by 15%. That's thanks to all the runes on Slow Time. Next, fire off your Magic Missile. This will proc your Cold Meteor, as well as 1/2 of Focus and Restraint, increasing your damage by 50%. Next, cast Meteor. This will bring down your Fire Meteor, as well as proc the second half of Focus and Restraint, increasing your damage by 50% again. And then lastly, teleport in to proc your Arcane Meteor to finish off your salvo, now benefiting from both Focus and Restraint and every possible buff you have. Now, if you really want to be maximizing your damage, you'd technically want to proc Focus and Restraint before Slow Time. So you would do Magic Missile, Meteor, Slow Time, and then Teleport. However, I feel that starting a battle without Slow Time generally isn't a good idea. That said, find a rotation that works for you. To round out this guide, let's take a quick look at each piece of gear and your ideal best-in-slot stats on them. For shoulders, Intelligence, Vitality, All Resist, and Resource Cost Reduction. Resource Cost Reduction is something that is important to this build. On your helm, Crown of the Primus, Intelligence, Vitality, Critical Hit Chance, Life Percent, Amulet, Delrashas, Intelligence, Crit Damage, Crit Chance. Typically for most builds you would go with Elemental Damage instead of Intelligence, but because this build uses all the various elements, you benefit more from Intelligence, which will affect all your meteors, rather than a single element which will just buff a single meteor. Chest, Delrashas, Intelligence, Vitality, All Resist, and Armor. Note that we've rolled off the attack speed, which we don't really need, in order to get more toughness. Gloves, Intelligence, Vitality, Critical Hit Damage, and Critical Hit Chance. Note that it's not super important how you get your Delzirs or Delrashas. There's no Delrasha shoulders, so you do have to get Delzir shoulders, and there's no Delzir's belt, so you have to get Delrasha's belt. You'll also ideally want Delrasha's chest because that attack speed rolls off to give you an additional stat. But between the pants, the gloves, and the boots, it doesn't really matter which set pieces you use as long as you can complete the desired set bonuses. So onto the belt, Delrasha's, Intelligence, Vitality, All Resist, Life Percent, Bracers, Ancient Parthens, Lightning, Intelligence, Vitality, Critical Hit Chance. And we'll quickly note here that if you can't get Ancient Parthens with Lightning, and instead have a different element, you could change your skill setup a little bit. For instance, the easiest substitution would be that if you have Cold on your Ancient Parthens, you would swap out Magic Missile Glacial Spike for Shock Pulse Piercing Orb. You cannot, however, go with Arcane on your Ancient Parthens, because Teleport Calamity is non-negotiable. Onto your rings, Focus and Restraint, Intelligence, Crit Chance, Crit Damage. For your pants, Intelligence, Vitality, Armor. Boots, Intelligence, Vitality, All Resist, Meteor Damage. For your Ether Walker, Damage, Intelligence, Vitality. For your offhand, Delrashas, Intelligence, Vitality, Critical Hit Chance, Meteor Damage, and Critical Hits grant Arcane Power. For your legendary gems, Bane of the Trapped, Zay's Stone of Vengeance, and Taeguk. One note about Zay's, you really want to be using Teleport to get away from enemies in order to maximize your Zay's damage. 50 yards corresponds to about half a screen, so you want to try to be half a screen away when your meteors are coming down. That wraps up this update. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment letting me know what variant of Delrashas you use. Check out these other videos, and if you enjoyed this one, share it, hit like, and subscribe to join Rhyker's Raiders. Hashtag League of Leggings, hashtag League of Leggings, hashtag League of Leggings. To find out why I just said that and how you can get me to say random shit, check the Patreon link in the description below.